Can you say something? You're a bit quiet.
Quiet.
What, it doesn't sound good?
No.
It doesn't.
Scott, thanks for taking time to do your least favorite thing in the world.
I hate podcasts.
You can just mention Scott's name and he's unemployed, so we don't have to really put anything in there.
So this conversation is precisely why people hate venture capitalists.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Cheat Code. All right, hello and welcome to season 4 of the podcast, which is now called the Cheat Code and Friends, from what I'm told by the rest of my friends on the production team here. Today's show is bringing one of our friends to the table. Mr. Scott Albro, the hater of all things podcasts, is going to lead us today in our podcast discussion about why VC is dead, why we all suck at our jobs. We should all just give up and everything like that. Scott, welcome to the show. It's great to have you, man.
Thanks.
What a ray of sunshine.
Yeah, great to be here.
I also love.
Did I say VC is dead?
No,
Somebody
you posted a link that to someone else's post who I think that was their attention grabber. VC is dead, and then like a paragraph below, it's like, oh, it is. It was actually thriving.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So.
I don't want to get in trouble.
I think Justin hooked you into this podcast by saying, you've been talking about VC a lot. You might as well come and talk to us. And you're like, screw you guys. I'm like, come on, man.
Please.
All right.
The first and foremost, great job on the shirt. I mean, you're fully embracing the Sun Valley ethos there.
I'm not going to lie. I almost put on my chambray shirt today. I almost wore the same shirt.
We should all wear chambray.
Awesome. Yeah. By the way, is there a difference between chambray and denim? Do we know?
Yes.
Fancy way to say denim.
Well, I thought chambray was lighter.
Yeah.
Like my shirts are all lighter than
this is denim, and you guys are right to call me out on this because people up here make fun of me for how frequently I wear denim shirts, literally. So
the Canadian tuxedo.
The Canadian tuxedo, yeah. In fact, I went to a party on Friday night, Canadian tuxedo.
Only?
Yeah,
well,
like it was a country western party, but I went full denim. Yeah.
So this conversation is precisely why people hate venture capitalists.
Yeah. Exactly.
What's the weight of your chambray shirt?
The difference between chambray and denim.
I'm just glad I've been pronouncing it wrong all this time. I always say chambray. So
I have no idea. I don't even know. I just heard Kester say chambray, so I went with that.
You know,
he doesn't know either. He doesn't know either.
I don't really.
He's the youngest, so we have to assume he's the most hip. I mean, that's just kind of the line of thinking that you go with there.
So Scott, first and foremost, like, what's new in your world, man? Like, you're coming off the experiment and so on. Any new exciting updates?
Not real. I mean, I remain incredibly excited about what's happening in the world of AI and continuing to basically help a few founders and CEOs in that world that I think are building really exciting companies. I'm also doing a lot of research in that space, specifically around agents. And then in general, just sharing my perspectives on the world of startups and whatnot. So not a lot new, but lots of thoughts to share and lots of strongly held opinions, I guess.
So that's a good, you mentioned like interesting AI startups. Well, like what, in your opinion, like what makes an AI startup interesting?
Well, I mean, for me, the state of AI right now, I think, is one where we can say the technology is incredible and the advances in sort of these underlying foundational models, as well as some businesses that are being built on top of that. It's a really interesting time. That's like the good news. It sort of feels like we've made these incredible advances on the technology side. The bad news, I think, is that we are generally, with a few exceptions, struggling to find like real use cases and meaningful ROI at this point in time. And I think that creates this kind of interesting tension in the AI market and in the startup landscape. I guess the way I would summarize it, like my take is kind of a slow takeoff take. Like this is going to work and this will be transformative. It's just going to take us way longer to get there than anyone wants to admit on a place like LinkedIn, for example.
Did anyone respond? Did you get, because you'd put up a post a while back on, what are the actual interesting B2B, or sorry, B2C, wasn't it? What are like the
Well, yeah,
actual like monetized and interesting
yeah,
B2C apps?
yeah.
Did you get any
No,
responses that were
no, you
noted?
get
No?
no, you get no, you do get some responses, but they're kind of like bullshit responses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, hey, there's this tutoring tool over here for chemistry students that is doing $1 million. You got some of that. The other one that you got is Perplexity, which I do tend to agree with. Like Perplexity is probably the most widely adopted consumer AI outside, by the way, outside of Chat GPT, right? Like Perplexity does appear to have some traction. When you do the research on that, like a lot of that traction's in Southeast Asia, with all due respect to people from Southeast Asia, right? Like, typically for like a venture scale business, you want to see like real traction in North America or someplace like that. And so no real like takeoff companies in the consumer space, with the exception of OpenAI. And I think you could probably add Anthropic to that list now. Like Claude's made some real inroads. On the
Have you played
B2B,
with Grok at all?
no, I have not. I have not.
Yeah, it's
I'm
interesting.
assuming you have. Yeah.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Actually, I was just talking to one of our founders because someone put up a post on like their prompt for competitive research and basically like feature development based on what users of the competitive solutions are putting up as complaints or enhancement requests. I thought that was an interesting use case, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
strange to your point on how like B2B is kind of first to the dance on this one, at least in terms of monetization and so on. And that's the normal, reverse opposite of what we typically see.
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of like non-intuitive sort of contrarian trends in the AI market. One is that the B2B use cases in terms of like value that's being delivered appear to be more advanced than B2C. And in B2B, I think specifically, you can look at like software development co-pilots, you can look at some of the agent deployments and customer support. Those things are working. Certainly the legal use cases, and that's, Harvey's led the charge there. That appears to be a very real business. So yeah, there are these like pockets of adoption and like real value being delivered in B2B, more so than I think you see in B2C. Again, with like this huge caveat that Chat GPT is like one of the fastest growing
Yeah.
products ever, right? So that's one thing that's like counterintuitive to me. The other thing that's counterintuitive to me is like some of the adoption that you see in B2B is occurring in laggard industries. Like if you had told me that like the legal profession, healthcare, specifically around transcription and note taking, were going to be some of the early adopters of I would have said no way. And that is actually happening, right? Like, usually we see like other startups in the tech industry are the
Yeah.
early adopters, right? And we're actually seeing some early adoption around traditional industry laggards. I don't necessarily know what that means, except it's interesting.
Well, I mean,
Well,
it's certainly. I think the reason why you're seeing so much value in B2B related to the AI is simply there's so much manual garbage that's done within most B2B organizations. And to your point, like not even industry, but from a department standpoint, like procurement, right? Like issuing POs all day long with, the scale factor being more headcount. Like we've just been doing things that are so inefficient in B2B for so long. There's ripe opportunities, I feel.
Pseudo alluded to like this conflict between an AI startup and traditional B2B SaaS. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it kind of dovetails into this concept. Like, does the company still look the same, right? You're consulting with founders right now. Does what they're building from a company standpoint look the same as a SaaS company? And then is that going into the consumer side of it, like non-traditional laggard industries adopting AI, does it just feel like a lower barrier to entry, right? Does it not feel like this heavy lift that
Yeah.
SaaS felt like before? Any thoughts on that? What are you seeing?
Well, I mean, I think those are there are two questions there, and both of them are like really big questions. So let me take the first question. So when I look at AI startups today and how they're different than traditional SaaS startups of the last 10, 15 years, I think there are two big differences. And both of these differences, if you nail them, can just drive like unprecedented growth rates. Zero to 100 million is like this new benchmark, right? Like we've sort of thrown out the old triple, double growth rates that we used to look for in a healthy SaaS company. And now everyone talks about like, well, how fast do I go 0 to 10? And then how fast do I go 0 to 100? And what's pretty incredible is like there are companies out there that are doing 0 to 10 in a year and then 0 to 100 in a couple years with like, or 3 years with like very few people.
Right.
In my opinion, there are kind of two drivers of that growth. One is these companies, and I think you all are familiar with this, but these AI startups, they're not just selling software features that make employees 10 to 15% more productive. They're actually selling labor and outputs, right? So like that customer support agent, like an AI agent that can close a ticket for you, that AI agent is actually completing the task, delivering an outcome, right? They're not just making the customer support representative human 10 to 15% more productive. And so what that does is it expands your total available market, or don't even think of it as TAM, think of it as like, how big can this deal be, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, I'm delivering outcomes for you as opposed to like, helping people put information into the CRM or whatever it is in the support world, right? And so that's one thing, your TAM's bigger, and like, because you're delivering outcomes, the deal size that you can go ask for at any given account's just a lot bigger. I don't know how much bigger, but feels like,
Well, it's
maybe
simple math ROI, right?
yeah, like 3, 4, 5 times bigger, right? Like the value you're delivering. So anyway, that's one thing. And then the other thing is, so anyway, thinking about product development and the economics of your business and revenue growth in terms of like labor, as opposed to like, well, I'm building software that makes people more productive. That's like a big change in the world of AI startups. And then the other thing that's sort of driving these growth rates is like internal productivity at these startups, right? So you can use AI internally to do a lot more with less, right? And so, you look at these companies like Cursor and Lovable, and Bolt and 11 Labs and so forth. They don't have, they're getting to like 50 million in ARR with like double digit employees. That's very, very different than what we used to see in SaaS 10, 15 years ago. And a lot of that's AI, some of that's product led growth, some of that's just like product development, how people are thinking about building these products. But like the productivity here, the efficiency we're seeing as these companies grow is really remarkable. So I feel like that labor thing's gotten a lot of attention, but I also think there's this thing which is just like internal productivity and efficiency via AI, via PLG go-to-market motions, and just via how these founders are thinking about the products that they build.
Well, every company that we have in the portfolio that's growing like crazy is
You have some of
fundamental.
those?
Strangely, we do. Is fundamentally based on labor market pain or skill set pain, like the absence of those two. And so not just to your point, not up leveling that individual who needs to be more productive, but just eliminating the need for that skill set, which is not being found in the marketplace. Employee attrition, and I feel like people have just been struggling with human capital for so long, and now that's a natural lens to look at the business through. If we can scale so much more efficiently, to your point, with single or double
Yeah.
digit through $50 million, that's crazy.
Yeah, the other thing, and by the way, there are probably people who are going to listen to this and say, "Oh my God, these guys just want to get rid of employees," right? Like, I don't believe that for a second, right? Like, what I believe we're doing is we're automating these menial tasks and we're freeing up time for people to spend on more valuable tasks. And I haven't seen any data on that. I wouldn't know how to study or quantify that, but I suspect that, you might be able to look inside of a business like Cursor or Mercor or someplace like that and say, you know what, like the early founding team was able to spend time on things that would really grow the business, right? And they didn't have to worry about like working every single support ticket themselves, or whatever the case might, or drafting proposals from scratch, whatever the case might be, right? And so I think that's a really important point to make here, like freeing up people to spend time on like uniquely human skills, building trust with customers, right? Like thinking critically, thinking about the business strategically is super important dynamic that's probably not talked about enough.
Well, also, if you look at it from the end user standpoint, right? Like when you consider, the influx of digital, software and skill sets is done to a lot of positions, and I'm thinking through the lens of a prop tech company that we've got in the portfolio. They serve multifamily residential, right? And so, like the job description for a property manager has actually gone from the traditional, be at the property, handle, feet up the street, show them the product, get them into a lease and so on. It's actually gone from like that fairly manageable and reasonable expectation into, okay, now you're also managing our digital ad spend. You're managing our marketing outreach, right? Like, and trying to pile that on one individual with the economics of the business, which the margins in real, multifamily are getting slimmer and slimmer as supply continues to go up and far exceed that demand. So, like, really, what we've done is we've created a job description that doesn't exist in the normal world, and we've got to hire unicorns in order to fulfill that. And so you think about like, yeah, do digital marketers exist? Absolutely. Do they want to be sitting and managing a property? Probably not. And so it was a bad fit for that, the overall needs of that business anyway. So if we can eliminate, one or more of those duties, now it just allows, I think a better fit from an employee quality of life perspective as well. So there's a lot of,
Great.
just I guess rectification of things that we've created that weren't really realistic in the first place.
Yeah, you got to think you got to think that comment you made
Please
about
do,
the
Sean.
laggard industries has something to do with that, right? Like if you look at healthcare and you look at legal, right? Like the top end people are super high value, high critical thinking, AI can't replace, but it's that lower rung that you're starting to get into territory where they're not reliable. The cost of hiring them is going up and they're churning, right? So the FTE replacement just makes sense. And I think that might be a reason why you're seeing that those laggard industries go up, because at the high end of the spectrum, those are high end human beings that charge a lot of money for what they do. Where
Yeah.
they're getting their wheels backed up is on the bottom of the barrel.
So long
Yeah.
story short, Josh does want to cut headcount from companies and increase
Apparently,
unemployment.
like
See,
yeah.
So Scott,
I
I want to
I
get
tried to
I want
put
to
a
get your thought on
positive
something.
spin on that, and Josh just took
Totally
us
depicted
back to
it.
like, yeah,
yeah,
like,
I'll be the
hang
Grim
on.
Reaper. I'll let
Yeah.
you guys look good
Yeah.
in your chambray.
Um, you, so Scott, there's with LLMs out there, and as they're progressing, it kind of creates this concept that people have talked about for a while, but the idea of like a soft API, and that not having to hard code APIs anymore, or having developers within organizations have to go out and pair one to one with different integrations. And I don't know if it's now. I don't know if you've seen a lot of this in some of the things that you've been looking at, but I think the concept of having these LLMs be able to talk to each other and connect to multiple different systems without having to necessarily hard code any of those things is really interesting, especially when you think about an agent to agent world where there's just two talking to each other at two different things to try to solve a larger problem with access to all these soft APIs. So I think that, to me, the nerd in me gets me really excited. I don't know how feasible that is in the short term, just for like security purposes and things of that nature. And like, does it completely wipe out middleware as it exists today? Have you seen any of that stuff? Any of that excite you at all?
Super interesting that you asked me that question. One of the companies that I'm helping right now, which is in stealth mode, is working on that exact problem. And I'm not sure how much I can share there, except there are some interesting protocols that are emerging in the realm of agent to agent communication. And I think that will be like where this market really grows, is around agent to agent communication. I do think the protocol layer itself, if it's not already commoditized, will rapidly become commoditized. And you're hitting on a key point, which is the layers that sit on top of the protocol are where all the value will exist. And so that's things like, security, authentication, privacy policies, helping one agent understand what the other agent does, right? I mean, there's all kinds of interesting work that's going to be done there. I will say this, my big concern about that space is I don't think agent adoption is happening as rapidly as some people would like us to believe. And for agent to agent communication to become like a big opportunity, you have this huge condition precedent that needs to exist in the market, which is there need to be lots of agents out there, right? Right now, there is agent adoption happening, but it's happening in isolation, right? Like I adopt the intercom fin agent in my support organization, and I do that in isolation, right? I'm not seeing anything yet, at least, where, that intercom fin agent needs to be able to communicate with this other agent over here for the simple reason that there is no other agent over here yet, right? Now, could you imagine a world like that in the next couple of years? Yeah, absolutely. It's like, okay, I don't know exactly how this will work, but it's like I've got intercom fin deployed. It's closing tickets for me. It's now also analyzing customer feedback for me based on those tickets, and it's feeding that information to an agent that exists in our product development organization that is like prioritizing a product roadmap based on what Finn's learning.
Mhm.
So you can see how this stuff's going to be super, super valuable, or like the world we all came from. Like imagine the communication that needs to happen when I close a deal, right? You could imagine agents managing a lot of that communication. So I think it's a huge opportunity. There's just, VCs like you guys, you like to ask the question, why now? I'm not sure we're at the why now moment for that. It doesn't mean people shouldn't be building companies here or products here, but like there is this huge, like, why now? When does this happen question when it comes to agent communication.
Well, the interesting thing, in relation to that why now, I see a massive opportunity here to actually, as a precursor to those agents, solve for what has been the biggest, most dire challenge in B2B forever. And if you ask anyone, like, what's the biggest challenge in your go-to-market, your marketing, your sales process, data is always fairly at the top of that list, right? Like
Yep.
these LLMs have to learn first. And in order for that to take place, quite frankly, I mean, at least where things stand right now, that information has to be consumable and it has to be somewhat accurate and somewhat reflective of what's actually going on in the business, which is where most B2B orgs have absolutely struggled. Even like early stage companies that we see, like have already created a bird's nest of stuff that doesn't reflect the real world. And so I see that as a massive opportunity, in that, again, first couple dominoes to follow, the precursor to this stuff is, either through a services aspect or, through, technology, whichever, probably a combination of both, but solving for that underlying data cleanliness issue.
Agreed. I mean, you can already see people like I don't know. It's funny, Dan Gottlieb, who I used to work with at Topo, and he's an
Is he
analyst at
still at
Gart.
Gartner?
He's
Okay.
he's still at Gartner, and he's sort of, in my opinion, like the leading mind on rev tech, revenue technology. He and I were exchanging some notes this morning, and he was talking about how like the one thing that he's really learned at Gartner is how applicable the Gartner hype cycle is to everything. And I totally agree with him on this, right? And for people who aren't familiar with the hype cycle, it's like when you look at a technology market, right? It's like your expectations go way up and then they kind of get crushed, and that's called the trough of disillusionment down here. And then they start to build back up, as people figure out how to deal with the risks and challenges around, and then you enter what's called the plateau of productivity, where like it's a pretty mature market, it's growing, but everyone understands how it works, right? And so AI, I'm not I'm guessing we're still at the peak of inflated expectations, but you're starting to see some people come down into the trough of disillusionment. I mean, I can't remember when this happened, but Klarna, which is like one of these, it's a fintech payments company. They made this big stink last year about how they had replaced Salesforce and Workday with AI, and they were letting go of a bunch of people, and they were going to stop hiring. Well, now the CEO's come back out and said, I realize I need to hire a bunch of really good people, right? Like this stuff just isn't ready to operate on its own yet. And whether that's data or the LLMs just having hallucinating, just having flaws inside it, right? Like this stuff, again, I just feel like this stuff's going to take longer than anyone wants to admit. It will work, but it's just going to take longer than anyone wants to admit. There's still fax machines out there, right? Like
Yeah,
people still fax stuff.
all great. Probably an indicator of a great, to Josh's point, opportunity for AI sales and penetration.
Yeah.
But with that, so I agree, and I also think the phrase I'm hearing the most right now is like it's one of the worst times to raise, and that's directly related to the growth multiple that most early stage venture capital firms are looking for. To your point, 80% up to 200 300% is just not the standard at which they're being measured. But
Mhm.
I'm curious how long that's going to persist for, because certainly in vertical we tend to deal with things that are more towards the lower end of that spectrum. Not that they're still not hyper aggressive, but
Yeah.
the expectations out there I think are absolutely pinned at that the height of that expectation curve. And I think you're going to see some readjustment of expectation there as well.
Yeah. I wonder if we see the venture market bifurcate a little bit, right? Where there aren't, I mean, we'll see, right? But like people are talking about this 0 to 100 benchmark now. I don't, I mean, there are companies that are doing that. I don't think there are many companies that are doing
No.
that, right? That can like feed the venture capital ecosystem in its current form. Maybe that changes, but I haven't seen data to suggest that like, hey, there are going to be thousands of companies that go from 0 to 100, right? In a few years. And by the way, if that does happen, how many of them will actually need venture capital, right? So it feels like there aren't enough companies to feed the venture ecosystem in its current form.
And you see that
May,
in deployments, right? Like right now, VCs are struggling to deploy capital because
yeah,
of
yeah,
that benchmark.
Well, that
yeah.
was actually the point of the post that we referenced earlier. It might even been pre-show that said VC is dead. The point was actually your point. It was there's not access to those companies that hit that scale is going to be very, very, very limited, right? So, the uppermost echelon of VCs will get access to those deals. The point was it's going to turn into specialization, right? You're going to have your niche where you play, where you're an expert that almost gives you your own VC moat that a founder is going to work with you because of this thing, right?
That
And that was a
specialization.
bit of the point of the
Yeah,
article. I
that's
think that's
that
what you're
that
saying.
that's interesting. I guess you guys sent that to me as like a homework assignment, which I did not complete. I didn't read that post, but
I
Awesome.
think he
but
sent it this
um,
morning, so you're kind of off
It's
the
a
hook
big
for
F you
this.
guys. I
yeah,
didn't do
yeah.
that homework.
But I think I agree with that. I think like whether it's specialization or bifurcation, bifurcation to me would be like you've got Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia, handful of other
Yeah.
firms that sort of gobble up these like 0 to 100, and they're basically looking for, I don't, I think it was Bill Gurley once said, like, an early stage venture firm, you have to have like a 60 to 70x outcome in a fund for the fund to really work, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so
You got to pay for all the losses.
yeah, exactly. And
That's
then
right.
it's a home run, it's a home run business, right? But then maybe there's a new class of venture firm that emerges where you basically say like, no, we're still good with like the triple double double thing. And those economics work for us, and we've set the right expectations with our LPs, and we believe we have fewer failures in the portfolio because of AI, and product-led growth or
Or a
whatever.
go-to-market
But
value add, for
yeah, yeah,
instance.
yeah. Or
Sounds
exactly,
familiar.
exactly. So anyway, I don't think venture's dead. By the way, those traditional growth benchmarks, those are still, like, in my opinion, really valuable companies, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yes.
Obviously, we agree with the statement. So I'm curious, like everything we're talking about, like you've taken, or at least ran one hell of an experiment around starting a very early adopter of AI technology, starting a company, rooted in the sales space, which is, I don't know, that you must be glutton for punishment in that area, certainly. But I'm curious to how you think about all the fundamentals that go into starting a company, given all of this change. The stuff we've talked about from a technology standpoint, certainly, but even staffing and going to market with it, with those organizations. Like it seems to me like all those, your business school and business book type knowledge is kind of out the window at this point.
yeah, totally. I mean, the one of the things I have really strong conviction on right now is, like, the founding team is all that matters. The reason for that, and
How
look,
do you define a founding team? That'd be a good definition.
how do I define a founder? I don't, the people who founded the company. I don't,
Just
I
founders, like not their, you know what I mean? Like the first 10 people,
well,
like what?
yeah, I mean, I guess I would have a loose definition there. I mean, certainly, like, the core group of founders, the 1 to 3 people who, like, start the company are members of the founding team. I would also expand beyond that. Like, another thing I have conviction on is, like, underneath that second wave of people that come after the founding team, you need 1 to 2 total stars in that group of people who are
So
going to be,
that's why I asked that question,
yeah,
because
who
like
are going to
that
be
for
like,
me is the critical aspect.
yeah, totally. I totally agree with that. Who are going to be like, you know, they're going to start off as a manager or whatever, but in like 2 to 3 years, they're running a big chunk of the business. You need some
Yep.
people like that early in a business. It just helps so much. And I think I haven't always been part of successful companies, but the successful companies I've been part of always had some of those people. Like, they weren't technically members of the founding team, but boy, they sure acted like founders. I think Kester was one of those people at SalesLoft, right? Like, honestly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it sounds
And
sounds like a familiar role.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, back to the original point. I just think, like, the founding team, however you define that, is all that matters. And I think, VCs probably would have told you that 5, 10 years ago. I think it's even truer today because the market is changing so fast. These founding teams need to be really smart, really adaptable, really resilient. Like, if we look in, like, the rev tech, sales tech space, I mean, the stuff that's happening in go-to-market organizations today, I've never seen anything. I've never seen pace of change like this. It is the mark, not the tech, but the way people are going to market is moving so fast and evolving so rapidly. If you are some slow ass founder, you're not going to make it, right? And, like, it's really, really interesting. I just think it's all, the market is changing so fast. Like, you can't say anymore, like, oh, it's the product, or you have to be able to adapt and be super resilient to these changes that are totally out of your control in many cases.
So if you've been following, I'm sure you saw this, but like, Jamie Dimon just put out, a rant on, the
Yes.
low performers and, getting people in the office and so on. I feel like a lot of people are kind of coming out of that shell and expressing those, very opinionated approaches, which we've been in kind of a drought of in the last 3-4 years. How does that decision to build either founding teams or the entire organization geographically centered in one area, like what does that decision look like for you, knowing the importance of those
Yeah.
founders?
Yeah. Well, I'll share my opinion. I just want to say, I once wrote a post on LinkedIn about work from home and return to office. and it went viral. It got 6.5 million views, which you might think is like the greatest thing ever, until you realize I was doxxed, my family was doxxed, there was threats of violence. I mean, this is like a really sensitive
Sensitive
issue
topic.
for
Yeah.
for a lot of people. My perspective is, in an ideal world, you are able to hire the best people possible and put them in a single location. And I look across the companies that I work with, the fastest growing ones are in an office. They just are. There's a culture thing there, there's a collaboration thing there, there's a commitment thing there. Now, I also am willing to deviate from that rule, even if people are like, oh, he's being hypocritical or whatever, if I can get like a truly remarkable person to join the team and they're going to be remote. I think that's fine. I think that's fine. The other thing I tell people is like, if you don't want to be in the office, fine. You don't have to work for a company that needs you to be in the office. You can go work for someone else, right? It's like a decision you can, these companies and CEOs make decisions about what they want. And you, as an employee, are entitled to make decisions about what you want. And the market is big enough. There are enough companies out there. There are enough employees out there where people can find matches, right? Like the thing that rubbed people the wrong way about my LinkedIn post, and this was a year or two ago, it seemed like I was saying, well, everyone should go back to the office. That's not what I was saying. I was just saying, like, there's certain companies out there that do want people to come back to the office. There are very valid reasons for that. I also very clearly said, if you as an employee don't want that, no problem. Like, I don't have a problem with that. You're probably not going to work for one of these companies, right? And that's just a trade-off that you make as an individual, and you have the freedom to do that. And I totally respect that. It's totally
I think
fine.
Yeah.
that's such a great point, though, because like just as many companies as there are that are dying on the hill that everyone needs to come back to office, there's the opposite that are saying, who is it who put the ad up in Times Square? I just saw it, right? That said, oh, we're going to continue to hire adults and let them make their own decisions and work wherever they want at some
That's
big
awesome.
company. But great. And that's where I
Yeah.
think the employee needs to hold themselves accountable and say, yeah, it's not your right to work in any one company.
Stripe, wasn't it? Was that a Stripe
It
ad?
might have been Stripe. I don't know. I just
Yeah.
saw it as a big billboard said, our employees are adults. They can do whatever, work wherever they want type of thing. Fine.
Yeah, I think the challenge there is it is different in the early stage, but to the point, like any sort of maxim, any sort of like rigid belief is likely going to be broken pretty quickly. And there are skill set deserts out there. I think we live in one of them, at least Josh and I, in Arizona. And as
Literally a
big as a
desert.
proponent that I am around like being in office, certainly within that first couple years, hiring with that proximity, I do think there are roles, and for me, marketing is one of those in Arizona. Like if I'm hiring a marketer, I'm going to try my damnedest to hire someone in state, but I know I'm going to have to most likely open that up, opportunistically to other candidates. But the thing that underpins all of this is, you said something like that matchmaking process in the hiring realm. Too many organizations just completely fall flat on what that should look like and what that truly should be in terms of like honesty and really being a matchmaking exercise.
Yep.
And so I think, just as much as founders should always be hiring, you should think really intentionally about your hiring process and what you are, conveying to those candidates and what you need them to convey to you in order for that to be successful. And I think just being upfront
Yeah.
about the desire maybe to ultimately bring someone in there from a travel perspective or relocate them eventually is certainly one of those items.
Yeah. By the way, I do think companies are getting better at that. I have been helping a couple of people who are just starting out in their careers try and sort of navigate kind of the tech startup job landscape. Most early, I don't know about later stage because their searches were focused on early stage companies, but most early stage companies, first conversation, they tell you exactly what the work culture is like. Yeah,
And not
yeah,
listing whatever's on the written on the
no,
wall
no,
or on the
no. It,
website.
it 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 is like, hey, we're here, like one person I was helping interview with a company hung up with the call. He's like, I have to go do some research on this 996 thing. And I was like, oh, did they bring that up? And that's the Chinese, you work
Mm-hmm.
9 to 9, 6 days a week. This was a company that was headquartered in New York. They told this candidate, first conversation, we have a 996 work culture.
Yeah,
And
I think
so,
that's where the guttural and oftentimes the angry response comes from. There is the dissolution of either assumption or agreement there, right? Like something
yeah,
changes, and
yeah,
yeah, that's going to piss people off.
yeah. But like way better to be transparent there, right? Like way, way better for the employer and more importantly, the employee. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
hope that becomes a maxim at not just early stage companies, but at all companies. I think that would be a massive win, and then at least we'd see less of these, hey, I submitted my app, got 8 interviews down the round, and then they ghosted me type of a deal, which still
Yeah.
is pretty prevalent out there.
We could start a movement to replace these value statements that exist on most website about pages with like, here is what a real week looks like here. Because that's really what employees care about, right?
Yeah,
You
or,
know,
or or here's a video of the last time the shit hit the fan, and and how everyone
yeah.
reacted.
Will we blur out faces? Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
Well, guys, we've covered a lot of ground here. I think we've
we
coming up
have.
on time. Don't mean to. Yeah, I think we've covered some ground. I don't know.
I
We
thought we
talked
some
were
about
gonna.
AI and
I thought we were gonna give CEOs grades on how they did in 2024. Are we not doing that?
thought we were going to discuss the federal budget and where we all think we should cut. No.
Gosh.
federal employees. That seems to be the yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Careful.
Awesome.
Well,
Some of your portfolio companies might not do well because it is interesting to go through the Doge stuff and look at like tech companies that are being impacted by that stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
for sure.
Super interesting.
There's
Super
going to be some
interesting.
ripples, certainly.
Yeah.
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 Well, Scott, we appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us. I know this must be your favorite podcast appearance of all time.
It's awesome. I've done it twice, so that says a lot, right?
That's
Like,
true.
That
yeah.
that does say
And,
a
and
lot.
we appreciate it greatly.
We
Yeah.
do.
No, thanks for
For
having
those
me.
of
I
you,
enjoyed it.
yeah, you're very welcome. For those of you listening for the first time, you can find us on any major podcast platform. If you
Everywhere.
haven't already, pick up the Go to Market Cheat Code book on Amazon. If you already have it, you need to leave a review. We need it. Thanks again for joining the
And
show.
by
We'll
the
see you next
way,
time.
the audiobook is now available.
Oh
Don't
my
skip
gosh.
over that, Josh. Audiobook
The
now
audio
available.
book
Pick
is
it
now
up.
available.
Josh, isn't it
God,
you who narrates it?
We're just falling all over each other. It should be. I wasn't given the opportunity, but I would have done it.
You have a radio voice. You could have done it. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
He does.
That's better when people tell me as a face for radio. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a nose for radio.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.